Good evening. I am Michelle Kidwell Gilbert, Chair of the Archaeology Committee of the National Arts Club. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar with the club, founded in 1898, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Gramercy Park with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote communal interest in the arts. Annually, the Arts Club offers 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, lectures, readings, theatrical and musical performances. For more information about the National Arts Club, kindly visit us at, and this is a new address, nacnyc.org, or find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. On behalf of President Dr. Tara Cortez, the Board of Governors, and the Archaeology Committee, I am particularly delighted that Dr. Elizabeth Rosen Stone discusses reflections of Roman art in the Buddhist sculptures of southern India. For context regarding the Hellenic world's knowledge of India, since our speaker focuses upon the Roman Empire, permit me some corollary background. Greek historian Strabo lived 63-64 BCE to approximately 24 CE, wrote his magnificent multi-volume geography, treating all the peoples of his time and countries known during the classical antiquity. For descriptions of India, he primarily utilized attested information garnered from Alexander the Great's campaigns into the Indian subcontinent, which took place between 327 and 325, as well as from an earlier historian, Megasthenes, who traveled to India in 302 as ambassador of a Greek prince, coincidentally named Alexander. The Bactrian Greek king, Emperor Menander I Soter, ruling between 163 and 130 BCE, reigned in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, although tonight our focus concerns South India. The Indo-Greeks achieved greatness under his military campaign. Additional Greek settlers in these lands moved further east towards the fertile plains of the Ganges River with its alluvian deposits. The region was once home to profound classicism, although Meander's conversion to the Buddhist faith led to an admixture of rich cultural traditions, termed Gandhara, which fused Greco-Roman art with Indian Buddhist narrative sculptures, questioning the idea that the art of southern India is indigenous. You shall learn more subsequently about the connection with Rome directly from our speaker, who treats fascinating visual references to the classical world through the Buddhist art of Nagarjunakonda and related sites in southern India from the 1st century BCE through the 3rd century CE. Former Theater Committee Chair, Linda Selman. Kindly stand, Linda. You all know the amazing programs that Linda produced for the club, which was spectacular, during COVID and afterwards. We were so fortunate for her. But she urged me one day to listen to her cousin, Elizabeth Rosen Stone's March 22nd, 2023 Zoom session, sponsored by the Classical Art Research Center at Oxford University. The title was A Reflection of Roman Art in the Buddhist Art of Southern India, and I'm not going to try again to mispronounce names. I do it naturally, unfortunately. And shall we say that I found, in quote, enlightenment from her presentation. It's taken nearly 2 years to schedule this program, and tonight's audience will have a similar opportunity. Our speaker received her bachelor's degree from Hunter College and doctorate in 1983 from New York University's Institute of Fine Arts, where her advisor was Professor Stella Crumrich. As a member of the excavation team at Sunk in Mathura district, sponsored by Berlin Museums for Indian Art, Dr. Stone learned the importance of studying coins to enhance her studies into India's glorious art and architecture. Her book, The Buddhist Art of Nagarjunakonda, has been in print for over 30 years, and that's really an extraordinary fact. Yes. The holder of numerous grants, among them in chronological order: Andrew W. Mellon Senior Fellow in Art History, the Metropolitan Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, the Indo-US Subcommission on Education and Culture, the Government of India, the American Institute for Indian Studies, the Institute of Fine Arts, the JDR Third Fund, as in John D. Rockefeller III, the Breezewood Foundation, and the Mary Livingston Griggs and Mary Griggs Burke Foundation. Kindly join with the Archaeology Committee in welcoming our eminent lecturer. Elizabeth, if you will.
You just made it easier for me to do this.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, we know we have things in common.
Yes. Thank you so much for that fascinating introduction. You have saved a lot of pages for me. I had written similar things about the classical works, but had to eliminate them because there's much more time to show you the art.
Is it good?
Am I not close enough? Okay.
Kiss it.
Is that better? Okay. It's long been known that there was classical contact with India. All of these classicists talk about art in India, southern India, but nobody has matched the art history with the classical texts. Recently, scholars have tended not to believe the details of the classical texts because they don't always pan out archaeologically. But it is true that there was all this connection, and we have to work on it and find out what it is. I was the first to work on South India because Nagarjunakonda was assigned to me as a master's degree, and it turned out to be my PhD and a book, which lasts, and still there are no other people who really want to work on it seriously, and you will see why in a moment. There's a good reason. Just to repeat what Michelle said, we have long been told that Alexander the Great moved his armies into northwest India in 327 BC, leaving behind fragments of the classical work. By the 3rd century BC, stone superseded impermanent materials used throughout ancient India. Regarding imagery, the Northwest, now Pakistan and parts of Afghanistan, developed an art form that is easily recognizable to those familiar with Hellenistic and Roman art. Now, when I first discussed this subject with Michelle, she said, "Oh, you're going to talk about Gandhara." No. I mentioned this lecture is not Gandhara. Gandhara is the place which we all know has classical influence, and many classicists think that Gandhara is the only place that has classical influence. Now, I'm just going to point out, if I can use the pointer properly, a few things which are strictly Gandhara. Now, do I have this right?
Does that?
Yes. This is a Buddha figure here. I'm sure you all know what a Buddha figure is. And he's standing in a very relaxed posture with very soft drapery on his body, and his body is sort of peeking through. Most important is his hairdo. It's hair. Well, the Buddha didn't have to have this kind of hair. He had little curls, according to the texts. And this is more like a classical Western hairdo, not anything like a Buddha, like a Buddha should be. Now over here, we see little scenes of narratives. Narratives are all over South India, but they don't look anything like this, as you will see. Little puppet-like figures on a flat ground, nothing behind them. Here, figures on flat ground, nothing behind it. And this is why nobody else does the work. Now first, wait, here we go. There are many Buddhist sites in southern India, but we'll concentrate on two of them, Amaravati or Nagarjunakonda. Only a few scholars study them seriously. Amaravati on your left, that is the Amaravati stupa, or rather a replica, small replica of the Amaravati stupa. The stupa was discovered in the 18th century, and the bulk of the sculptures, it was ripped apart. The bulk of the sculptures ended up in the Madras Government Museum in Chennai, the British Museum in London, and the Amaravati Museum at the site maintained by the Archaeological Survey. What am I doing wrong?
Nothing, just take this one.
This one's better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we don't have the pieces together, and it's very hard to piece them together, and it's very hard to really know which part of the stupa we're looking at when we find a work of art. What is extraordinary is when we actually get close and are able to see them in all the museums where they have it, and we learn a lot by that. Now, these miniatures are made in many places. Now, over here is Nagarjunakonda. Nagarjunakonda is under here. Mm-hmm. The site was flooded. The archaeological site was flooded. It was excavated between 1926 and 1926 and 1934, and then re-excavated from 56 to 60. After that, a dam had to be built there. There was a famine in the area, and the whole site was flooded. Before it was actually flooded, the Archaeological Survey of India dug as fast as they can, and that was it. Whatever is downstairs under the water. They brought many of the pieces up to the museum at Nagarjunakonda, and several pieces are on the hillsides surrounding the area. You can only go by boat. Now it's a more modern boat, but this was the boat that I would go on every morning with the workers at the site. So everything is up on a remote island. The island and the idea of making this island museum came from Jawaharlal Nehru, saying that one day India will be very wealthy and everyone will go to the site of Nagarjunakonda. There are 2 major hotels on the site, or motels. I know only 2 people who's ever slept on the island, and I'm one of them. So it's a difficult topic to work on. Now, let's go forward. Oh. Here's another miniature, not the one we were looking at. This was from another museum called Guntur. There are a lot of tiny little sites that have a few pieces of sculpture. Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda have the most, but almost every site in South India, there must have been an enormous Buddhist community. And I want you to look, I want you to look. Is the light on? No. Down here is a little square projection. coming out from the front of the stupa. They're very strange projections. They're only in this area of South India, and they're no place else in North India. And nobody has ever figured out what they are in terms of Buddhism. Why this extra projection? Now I'll start looking at my notes here. If you look at the projection, you see two parts. Here, there's something over here, a long, narrow piece, and a square piece. Here's a long, narrow piece at the at Nagarjunakonda, and a square piece. Now, these are definitely out of proportion, but the way they would be placed, if we would reconstruct the Nagarjunakonda stupa, was to place this under this. They would be of equal size. Unfortunately, we can't really show you a full size. Well, I will show you one, but this photograph is awful because they're 11 feet wide and nobody's gotten good pictures of them. Even in my book, they're terrible pictures. I suggest that these Ayaka friezes, which were no place else, combined with the Ayaka panel below it, so you see the one horizontal and then the square under it, which is parallels a Roman sarcophagus. Not only do they echo the format, but also the concept behind the details of the sarcophagus. Thus, a figure of a Roman general in the major part of a sarcophagus should be seen as parallel to a major event in the life of the Buddha. In this case, the transportation of the Buddha's turban to heaven. Is this still working? No?
Let's try this one.
Okay. Is that better?
See, is this on? No. I can't hear it.
They're all on, guys. You just have to speak into it.
Testing.
Okay.
That's
Close
doing.
that, yeah.
Hold it close.
Okay. I have to hold it close. Like ice cream. An exquisite Ayaka panel from Nagarjunakonda. Oh, that's the next slide. Up there, that's one of the biggest. Illustrates the conversion of the Buddha's half-brother Nanda, which is an episode in the life of the Buddha. Looking at the lid of the Roman battle sarcophagus from Fortunaccio of about 180, which shows scenes from the life of the deceased and his family on the sarcophagus lid. That's here. So that's the family. And below that would be, below the top one, if we had it, would be a Buddha, a major event in the life of the Buddha. But below this long frieze, we have a major scene of a general, a triumphal scene, which is what he wants to be remembered by. In other words, a formal scene, this is what he has to be remembered by. Everybody recognizes this scene. He is in battle, he holds a weapon, and it is very crowded and difficult for you to see. But you have to stare for these because it's an important type of sculpture which we are sure was seen at Nagarjunakonda. Now, note here, let's see if I get, over here is a head, a Roman head, and over here at the end is a figure of a female tree goddess over here. So all of them have tree goddesses on either side, which parallels the Roman heads, which we find on many sarcophagi around the area. So it's a parallel structure. Why would this happen? We really can't answer that. We just know they're both objects which are used to praise the dead. Now, here we go further after this Portnachi sarcophagus, and look on top, Buddhist narrative, and below it is a Severan sarcophagus in the Metropolitan Museum. Now, get your eyes ready for little figures in here. In here, couples standing next to each other, couples here, and couples. Why are couples on both the sarcophagus and the stupa? The Nagarjunakonda panels have a typical format of all others, representing Buddhist narrative reliefs, separated by auspicious couples. These auspicious couples are to attract the laity to come to the Buddhist faith. And the message, yes, they're only at Nagarjunakonda. It is a very secular place and very unusual in that way. There's lots of things I can tell you about it, but that's another few hours. Now, the use of couples in early Buddhist art starts in very, very early, so we don't really have to look for Rome in them. But at Nagarjunakonda, the figures are lively and interact with each other in a large variety of poses. At each end of the sarcophagus of figures are Eris and Psyche, the personification of the human soul. Note the touching of male genitals.
Yes, I noticed that.
This is
I noticed that
here,
when I was seeing it. I said,
and
"I
this is
must be missing
totally
it."
rejected by India, so they keep their own sense of morality. Male figures never, ever expose their genitals, except in later Hindu art, and female figures can be dressed or dressed or undressed. That's okay. Undressed is okay, as long as they wear their jewelry. It's true. You'll note most people in India have wonderful jewelry. Now, this is something I just noticed just before I was leaving for Oxford. I noticed all of these comparisons. This is in the Metropolitan Museum, the Eros and Psyche. And here are two of the major figures from Nagarjunakonda panels, which are in between all of the Buddhist narratives. When my book was published in India, the publisher didn't quite get it, what my book was about. So he had all pictures of these erotic couples, and he had to be made to understand that that was not what the book was about. Just a few couples, and the rest of the words of the Buddha. Now, as we go on, there's lots of different facets, different ways we can look at this material. And one of the most important things in India is jewelry. Indians wear a lot of jewelry and always have. There was a lot of nice jewelry discovered at Nagarjunakonda, and there were a lot of coins. Now, coins were discovered all over South India, Roman coins. all over South India, not Gandhara. The trade between Rome and India is to South India, not to North India. So, you know, the idea of Gandhara being the most important for the West is not true. It's just one aspect of foreign influence. So we have coins, and here we have a coin of Hadrian down here. That coin was actually excavated at Nagarjunakonda. That is very important. I'll show it to you again in a few minutes. On your upper right are fake coins, which are copying Roman coins, supposedly. There's every variety of fake, which is some that fool everybody, some real good ones, and there are great arguments, yes or no. And then there are some which are blatantly fake. And here you see the recto and verso of two coins on the top. Now, on the right one, you see two holes. Mm-hmm. And that means it was meant to be worn on a string. And so it was a string necklace. And on the bottom here, this is a holder, which you put a string right through it. You were the first people, this is the first audience to see these. These were just discovered recently, the most extraordinary. If you look at the left, mm-hmm. they're clay versions of the same thing, again excavated at Nagarjunakonda. Here is another necklace on your left, excavated at Nagarjunakonda. This has a coin of Faustina in the center of the necklace. In other words, Roman coins were treasured, used as jewelry, and also the gold coins and fake gold coins were also treasured, used as jewelry, and we're not sure how much they were used for money, but we believe some of it was. But that's an open question. And here, over here, we have a string, what's called in the Sanskrit texts, a string of denaries on the breast. This is a line drawing of one of these sculptures at Amaravati, and that is a string of denaries on the breast. Coin jewelry was very popular all over the world, and India. And here is a 19th century coin of Arsinoe II, perhaps done by Castigliani, and perhaps you all noticed it when Michelle made the introduction. It's a continuation, it shows a continuation of the same tradition, which is basically classical tradition, which we find in India. Now, just remember, previously I showed a gold coin from Hadrian. Oh, one more nice necklace. On your upper right is a necklace in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's labeled Hellenistic. I've only seen it for the first time recently. And on this gentleman, you see a similar necklace. This is a site, part of the South Indian group, which was recently excavated at a site called Kanaganahalli, and it represents the prototype for many of the things that take place at Nagarjunakonda. But there is a beautiful necklace with medallions and fringes hanging down. So it keeps going on and on and on. I can keep showing variations of things like that. Now we go to a Buddhist narrative relief known as the Great Departure, which is that the Buddha is leaving his home to seek enlightenment. His home with his wife, and it's a very turbulent thing that happens. And over on your right, it is the same coin of Hadrian I showed you previously, which was found right next to that piece of sculpture in the excavation field. Now, that piece is in the Metropolitan Museum, and it has a parallel piece in the Musée Guimet in Paris. These were brought to the United States long before the government took over the site, so they're here and at the Met, quite beautiful. Now, the scene of the Buddha leaving his home is quite simple. In Gandhara, we find a very complex scene with his wife saying, "Please don't go." Everyone else saying, "No." But here he is, it's a great departure. And he's on a horse, his hand is raised, right hand is raised. And see, these little figures are holding the hoofs of his horse, so his family won't hear him go and try to bring him back. Now, the image probably dates to 2nd century or 3rd century or perhaps late 2nd century. It's recently been redated in a very good way. Now, look on the right on the coin of Trajan. And look at the similarity. Well, I have duplicated this coin. In other words, shown a coin from another die, which I photographed at the American Numismatic Society. There's a gold coin where you can see the emperor, Hadrian, on the horse with his right hand raised. Now, this is right next to we wouldn't make a comparison here, but it's right next to where this image took place. And this is not the standard image of the Great Departure. An earlier site, recently excavated with the lovely name Dupidu, shows a scene of the Great Departure. And it's just, sorry, I'm not good at this. And it shows just a horse. In other words, South India preferred aniconic images, except when something Roman came along, they changed it. They modified it. I wouldn't have made this comparison if the coin wasn't right there, right next to the piece. So this is the why we can make that comparison. Now here's a later piece of sculpture and another coin, which is more complex. And what takes over is angles. It's all angles. It gets a little crazy. Here are angles of the umbrella over the horse and the figure of the Buddha departing his family home, or rather the Buddha to be. And here, still, these little beings underneath, getting more elaborate than they were. And the composition gets very cuckoo. The figure over here has long legs, forming angles, and he tries to get out, stretch his arm, but he can't. He has to bend it all the way around and back. So everything forms angles of the legs. And here we are seeing this in the Roman composition. Now this is a compositional thing. And what seems to happen is these figures, these images of the Great Departure get more and more complicated as time goes on. What do I have next? Now, here we start looking at the Portinaccio stupa back into the Roman world. Now, oops. And here you see the major figure. Here you see the major figure on the horse in the center, and all these diagonals using weapons. The weapons form the diagonals, and then you see the same diagonals of the legs of the horse. And you start to see how the later Nagarjunakonda figures start to get very busy, very, very busy, as you see in this sarcophagus. Now we turn to something a little lighter. The Prince Rahula, the son of the Buddha, asking for his inheritance. And I want you to stare back and forth to both of them. Mm-hmm. And that is the cult of Isis from Herculaneum. In other words, a painting from 1st century AD. Yes. Yeah. And what you see here is a question of structure and perspective. And I believe there's a particular artist who did this particular one and several others at Amaravati. And that artist it knows how to show perspective. The use of perspective was unknown in India before that. And all of a sudden, several pieces at Amaravati turn out this way. So, note over here, there's a chair going here, leaning toward the back. Now, actually, when you're up against this picture, there are 4 planes of carving, starting in the front, going to here, and this is the most shallow point, the deepest point. It's amazing. So it seems that the artist here is trying to copy something here, which is achieved in painting. And it is the same composition, in spite of the fact that one is painting and one is sculpture. The back of the chair, which is the back of the Buddhist chair, with the 3 jewels of the Buddha here, is mimicked over here in the figure of Isis. 2 figures over here and over here, these 2 bunches of figures, are paralleled in the 2 bunches of figures on the side of this composition. Now, when the Buddha's son asks for his inheritance, which is what this is, the Buddha says to him, "You are supposed to be a monk." And so he has to obviously go from here to this side, and these are the monks which are helping him become a monk. It is amazing in comparison. You can keep working on it. The figure pushing the Buddha forward parallels this figure here, which is the priest in the Isis. And the same ones, the same composition, stops at the same level back here, and then in the far distance is the plane moves forward on both. It is extraordinary. Now, other things about the image is little Rahula himself. And here you are in Trajan's column. And we notice that it is just hard to believe that Indians were not aware of works of art like this. They never made children in Indian art that looked like this, that interacted. If there were children, it was little, kind of, what should I say? Just like little statues. But there was no interaction, there was no holding, there was no touching. Mm-hmm. So here when we look at a section of Trajan's column where a Dacian is telling this young child to move forward, it is parallel to what we found at Nagarjunakonda. Now we come to the problem that bothered me all my life, and I do mean it. It is a figure, a work of art, which I and a lot of other people have said it looks Trajanic, looks like Trajan. And so I tried it out, and I worked on it, a lot of these things which you just don't know if they're going to work when somebody makes a suggestion. I made the suggestion. I thought independently, but others did it independently. Now, let's just notice this is somebody on a horse. It is not the Buddha, and I haven't found anyone who can identify the scene. I definitely can't. And all the right people were at Oxford when I gave my lecture, and nobody was able to identify it yet. It will be identified. But notice this figure on the horse, and his arm is leaning way back here, way back, and his hand is just flat. Underneath are figures under the horse.
Fine.
Under here, there are figures down there. And as we see figures on at Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda, there are more and more figures underneath on the bottom of the compositions, frequently by a horse. Now, in Roman terms, those are the people who were killed. But we find compositions killed, like the Dacians being killed by the emperor. So we're finding more and more figures like this. And over here, this is crazy, we can't tell. It's back, I'll take it back. Over here, we can't tell if the leg is the horse's leg or if the man is kicking the leg. It looks pretty dangerous. But is it Trajanic? Okay, let's see. So I had to flip it back because what I find is the compositions are frequently flipped back from the Roman right to left and left to right. But that's also the case within India. In other words, there are sites, sculptures in Buddhist narrative at one site, and then you find it maybe 100 years later or 50 years later at another site, and it was flipped. We're sure there were cartoons of something, something that helped us. So here we find Trajan, and
Mike? Mike.
here we find, thank you, I'm not used to this. Here we find Trajan over here. Now his arm is going back. We have to remember where these arms are, this is important. Because it's believed that he had a spear, that's the history of this, and the spear went, he went this way. So he's holding his arm in preparation for the spear. We saw a weapon in the arm at the Portinaccio sarcophagus, but here we have the spear. We have the figures under the horse, in this case being subdued by Trajan, and a very crowded composition. This is where it stood when I published this in 2016 in a British Museum publication, and it was very much accepted. Before I went to Oxford, the head of the committee asked me if I could find, he thought I should find an earlier example or any other example. See what happens if you use other works of art as the prototype. And I did. And here it is. The Ludovisi sarcophagus, which is a very well-known work of art. And here is an arm being extended.
Yes.
Not in war, but in victory. So it is a completely different subject matter. Notice, of course, in the Ludovisi sarcophagus, all of these defeated people at the bottom. They're defeated in the war. And on your left, you see that this is the kind of thing that was there in India. Now, as it turns out, the dating of each is the same, absolutely the same. So we can't ignore this kind of things. And the classical scholars of the ancient world knew all this, and everyone puts it in front of a book and introduces us to that in that way, but here it is. This is what we have to look at to further understand it. Now, I have looked at this hundreds of times, looked at every sculpture, or almost every sculpture in the site, and I'm planning to continue it. But it keeps growing and growing and growing, and it's clear that South India was quite the place for the rest of the world. Now here are two heroes. We can see them with their arms spread out. We can see them with their arms spread out, being very happy that they are victorious in the world. Now, how did this all happen? We know how it happened to a certain extent. There was a great deal of trade between India and Rome. Rome was exporting things to India, mostly gold, but goods came from the west to the east. Now, what you see on the right is what we call this the Brahmapuri bronze. It was a copy of Lysippus, the favorite sculptor of Alexander the Great. This was found in India. Now, a lot of stuff must have come into India like that. So there were small objects which the artists could see. And that must have been very popular in India. But we only found one so far, one of that quality. But it is, as far as you can go, it's a top quality piece. Now, on your left is something I noticed recently, published by Bianchi, who published a 4th century harness. And he said these were distributed all around the ancient world in the hundreds, and even beyond the Roman imperial area. So we have things like this which could have slipped. Now, a lot of stuff, Indian stuff, went through Egypt, from Rome to Egypt to India, and the same thing back. And they all paid tariffs. We know about that now. And a lot of stuff is in Egypt now. There's finally a Buddha figure in Egypt. So everything went two ways. Mm-hmm. So I hope you see that South India had a lot of classical art. Thank you.
excited. Okay, let me use this. We can use maybe just one. Oh, I'll take this.
Oh, you want this one? Take
No, it doesn't matter. I'll take this one.
Take this one. We know this one works.
Okay. This one. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, good. I want to thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. And to see some of these connections in poses was wonderful. I was looking at one of the figures when you said we're not sure whose leg it was, and I was trying to imagine the adjacent ones. Would it go here or there? So I had a lot of fun with this. Let me mention, no, you're going to stay up because we have a couple of questions first. But I want to mention 2 programs that we had that came to mind as you were talking. Our first event for International Archaeology Day from AIA, Archaeological Institute of America, when we had an ambassador, it was Ambassador Kahona from Sri Lanka, and he showed us the temple of Buddha's sacred tooth. So we've seen a little, but very different from this. And we did have Francisco de Angelis, and this is online. He spoke about Hadrian's Villa. So some of you may want to look at that afterwards. I was fascinated seeing the poses, and I particularly liked the connection with Egypt, with Herculaneum, and then what you were saying right now. So
Well, this guy was probably made in Egypt. This guy was probably made in Egypt. Now, as I said, it became part of the Roman Empire in 30 BC, and the defeat of Anthony and Cleopatra, and that's when the stuff kept coming. And this is totally extraordinary. It was here in New York at an exhibition, and I wrote the article on it. I love it. And
you will give me a copy of the article.
yes, of course. So here is a really major piece. Now, why don't we have more? Well, we have a lot of scraps, a lot of not so nice looking things, and a lot of copies of Indian things. Also in mirrors, we have classical mirrors, copies of classical mirrors. One thing I really didn't have time to show you, but I showed at Oxford, is a terracotta and an Indian version of the same terracotta. Of the Indian terracotta, which was an Indian version of a sculpture at Pompeii. And I was fortunate enough to remember that I had a classmate many years ago who had worked at Pompeii and got pictures of it, which will be published by Oxford any day.
All right. At this time, we'll be opening up the floors for some questions. Anyone?
Yeah, I want to know, because I once saw a photo, I don't know if it looked like your first image was this, of a statue of Buddha, carved statue around time of Christ or something later, probably a little later. And Buddha was wearing a Roman toga, which it looked like, I guess they got the clothes transferred over too. It looked like the first image that you showed of a
Yes,
Buddha
of
on
course.
the left wearing a toga, something that looked like a toga.
That's right. That's standard Gandhara. And that's, when we have textbooks and studies, when I went to school, when everyone goes to school, classical influence is Gandhara. So, but this was supposed to be the indigenous section, and South India is so rich with sculpture. But because of the disastrous archaeological problem, I was told recently that people don't want to do dissertations on either especially Nagarjunakonda, because it's all underwater. And unfortunately, the data is kind of gone. It runs up to 110 degrees there. And I don't know why I was comfortable there. I don't know why. But most of the archaeologists left the site and went home to wherever they wanted to go home. And that was kind of the end of work on it. So I published my book on it. I got permission from the government to publish my book from the Archaeological Survey of India. And their book came out, I was 1994, they came out finally in 2006. But everyone was dead then. These were from old notes. You know, all the archaeologists were dead at that time, which was, so there's this big excavation report, which isn't very usable.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Hi. Were any Roman sarcophagi found in South India? Where did they see them?
No, not yet. No, there's a lot, we can go on and on about this. I actually feel that, well, there are two kinds of things. There were drawings. That, we know there are drawings. Now, whether a sarcophagi or not, I'm not sure. I know there were drawings of battle scenes because there were scrolls that the Roman generals were sent, all of them were sent out to the ends of the world, which is Egypt. And Egypt was working with South India. So it went from the scrolls talking about the efforts or the great works of the Romans, and they went from Egypt back to India. These we know existed, but we really don't have the evidence. There's literary evidence for this. But
I want to add to this. We believe there were pattern books that the artists used in Pompeii and other sites. And I thought it was very interesting when you were trying to say, well, I think I know who this artist is, and he's done some others, because we do have this. And when you did a program at a time when I could not be in New York about painting techniques in caustic, and I know also it's not just wall paintings, there was traditions of paintings on terracotta, on wood, and certainly pattern books, independent portable paintings, these could travel and influence artists.
no, that's what I see. But this is, you find little bits. We have to look basically at the pictures, and when they're the same, even though we don't have the answer, we can't ignore it. It's been ignored forever. This is the first time you're hearing anything like this. And I saw it when I was an undergraduate. I just looked, I was, oh my God. It was just like that. But people like to write what is in the textbooks and write about Gandhara.
I have one here.
Oh, yeah.
One here, and the last one's on that side.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Question, a lot of this is about influence of Roman art on South India, but to what extent do we know about the influence of South India on Rome? And a lot of these dates overlap by 50 years. So to what extent do we, dating them, do we actually know that it's not, or was there, a vice versa, like influence from South India?
I had to cut the lecture. I was going to talk a little bit about that. We have, in literature, we have a lot of information. We have one piece of ivory from India that showed up in Pompeii. I was going to show it to you, but I just had to make this shorter. I had about an hour and a half on my... So I had, there was a magnificent ivory that went from South India to Pompeii. And there is evidence. We're also finding Indian pieces in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is now becoming a good place to look at. There's difficulty getting, a lot of excavations, but things have been found which are sort of Indian. There is the Roman world had the largest production of sculpture in the planet. There's no question about that. And people liked it. It's as simple as that. And now you're finding things all over between Saudi Arabia. In Egypt, we just found, and this was extremely exciting, I've seen pictures of it, but at a place called Berenike, there was a Buddha figure. There is an inscription of, I think it's Philip the Arab. Is it Philip the Arab?
Oh, isn't that interesting? I'll
Yeah.
tell you why in a minute.
Yeah, of the 3rd century, and it's the same time that Nagarjunakonda is 3rd century. And then there's a Buddha image, and there's a big argument about that Buddha image. The archaeologists, or many people think that it's Gandharan, but everyone thinks that everything is Gandharan if it's classical. But I'm pretty sure it's from South India. So, and then we have inscriptions from South India on the Egyptian coast. So we have things going back. This is our first big thing going back. Now, a colleague of mine does something which I can't do, and she can't do what I do, so we're a good pair, can trace literature from South India. There's a story from Nagarjunakonda called The Man in the Well, which goes throughout Europe and ends up in the Confessions of Tolstoy. So I've given that as a lecture a few times, and I can't, we can't trace. There aren't enough people who do this, but there is a whole group of people working on what we call the Indian Ocean trade. And they're working from a different point of view than I am, and it's good. I mean, everything is starting to come together. They're finding ports, what has been exported. They found the place where ivories were exported from. Again, it was South India, as I had always expected. We have ivories in Afghanistan from South India, and I claim they're from South India. Other people claim they're from North. So we're trying.
Perfect. I have one over here.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question and make a comment, and then we have a last question here. In Egypt, a lot of the ivories are hippopotamus ivories, and we think often in terms of elephant. Are these elephant, hippopotamus? They're elephant ivory.
They're elephant, and they're from South India.
Okay.
The British Museum did.
Can she please have the mic?
There's a big argument on this, and I've published them as being South Indian. They're called the Greco-Roman ivories. And I've convinced they're from South India and have published them. The British Museum did a study of these ivories, whether they're from South India or from Afghanistan. And somehow, after I made a bad review of somebody's article, I don't remember whose, they figured out that the pieces were from South India. So that's the state of some people's thinking today, but other people think other things.
I want to just do something follow-up. And this is a program I wasn't able to get. Philip the Arab. I met one of his descendants, Prince Garius. Prince Garius and I participated in a session at the United Nations when I spoke and he spoke. And he's from one of the Christian families that ruled, this is so many years ago. If I tell you it's like 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, ruled someplace in the Middle East until the Muslims invaded. And then his family and a lot of the Christians were ousted. I'm not going to say it's Lebanon. We think of the Lebanese Christians, but there were other places also. And so when you said Philip the Arab, it was, if I have my notes, I would know exactly where. For Prince.
He seems to have involved,
Was there something in Iran?
It could have been. I mean, it was someplace in the Middle East. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly. And I asked him, do you want to speak? And he wanted to speak, and we couldn't arrange it, and then it separated.
All right.
That's very
Thank you. We have a
Yes.
question over here and one last question on the right-hand side before we wrap it up, if I may.
What's the question?
Hi. I'm not sure. Yes? Oh. Hi. I wondered if much is known about who actually.
I can't hear you.
Oh, louder. Okay. I wonder if much is known about what artists and sculptors actually made these works. It's interesting to think about a pattern book, as was mentioned, that could travel, and also who hired people to create these works.
There were guilds that did these works, that did this. I'm not really familiar as much as other people on guilds. That hasn't been on my mind recently. But there were, oh, excuse me. Okay. You know, the only reason we know there are pattern books is we see something turned over, flopped over from another site. I mean, I first was aware of this when a student of mine gave a seminar report, and she showed something at the site of Goli Village, which is a little later than Nagarjunakonda, and next to an Amaravati relief, it was the same relief, only flipped over. So that is a pattern book. Also, one other thing, when I was at an excavation in Mathura in North India, we found clay impressions of the sculpture, of stone sculpture. And you could hold the clay impressions in your hand. And I still have them. My little, yeah. And some of those things may have been taken from place to place. There are also clay impressions of lotuses, which are on the railings of a particular piece of sculpture. So that's what we have. And how much we can put together in pictures, we don't know. But I'm very glad, I'm very happy about all the work which is being done on the sea trade itself. So they find little gems that I always thought was the case but didn't have the evidence. So it's for them to take over and fill in the holes that we need.
I found his Prince Garius of the Ghassanan Empire. It's Ghassan. Do you know? Does anyone? It was an early Christian empire in the Middle East. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific than that. I think
Thank you, Michelle. There was one last question right here.
I was wondering your thoughts about the diffusion of the, I guess in your case you're talking about the Roman art in through India. It seemed to be you're implying that a lot of it came from Gandhara south, but
No, I was not implying it. No.
Yeah, so I'm wondering about what evidence there might be from southern, rather than say from the Malabar coast.
Okay. What the story is, as I said, out of one of the many things I had to cut out was the sea route map. When the boats went to from down the Red Sea and down through the Red Sea and eventually to India, they went to several different places. Some went to the north, some went to central India, and a great deal went to the south. So we have all of that evidence that things were created in the south.
Where you studied, do you have evidence or your thoughts about whether it came from like the Malabar coast
In terms of Gandhara, there are certain individual, and again, if this were longer, I would have brought you another great departure and the same coin in Gandhara. That one image was repeated in both places, but the rest of it, the narrative is different. Stupas and Buddhist narrative is the major feature of South Indian art. The Buddha image is the major feature of Gandharan art. We don't have all of those nice, gorgeous Buddhas that they have, classical. So the boats went in both places, and they absorbed different kinds of things. They didn't absorb the same thing. It did not come down from Gandhara. Absolutely not. Yes, it is from Cochin. There is a site which is definite. Well, it's now been. People think it's the ancient, one of the ancient ports. There's Roman pottery is found all over the coasts in the south. Things go from Cochin and the ports there across. Even in Western, and if the boat stops in Western India, there's a very elaborate set of roads going across from west to east. And in the middle of that place, in the middle of the two, is a site called Ter. And a lot of stuff was found at Ter. The same things that were found at Nagarjunakonda were found at Ter. Now, those things, the jewelry things I showed you, nothing like that was found in the north. The North Indian jewelry is more something very modern looking, and any woman would say, "Oh, great," you know. But yes, it just didn't happen that way.
Yes, I want to thank you for an extraordinary hour plus. We've all learned so much, and it's been wonderful. Our next two lectures will be given March 20th. Glimpses into our past, present, and future from the Turkana Basin Institute with its director, Dino D. Martins. We had an earlier director from the Turkana speaking to us. Now we're going to have a follow-up. And on April 7th, Alexander's been mentioned. Well, we have a lecture on Alexander at the End of the World, his forgotten final years with Rachel Kusser. If you want to be on our committee's archaeology annex list, Courtney, would you stand the beautiful blonde in back? Give her your email, your card, and she'll make sure you get invited to our programs at the club. And next, a little punch and get to know the fellow audience members in back. Thank you, and I thank you, Devon, also for your assistance.